Thanks all for coming along this evening. The purpose of this is essentially to I'll give you a quick update of what I've done in the last week so that you know, and then the majority of this sort of 1 hour meeting is generally just me being, accessible to you, fielding questions that you have, because fundamentally this is a big team effort we've got going. And so that kind of interaction, participation, Q&A is just how I think we should be doing business going forward. So first up, I promised during the election that if I got elected, then I would be hitting the ground running and trying to grow the movement as fast as possible and making it a big tent. So I'm very happy to let you know first up that since I was elected, and it was announced about this time last week, we had hundreds or several hundred new members come on board. We are now over the 18,000 members mark quite comfortably. I've pushed also European Movement Twitter, which has now gone from 130 something thousand to past the 140,000 mark. I've been pushing European Movement in Scotland too, which has been growing well. And also, if you saw the crowdfunder email today, happy to say that just during this afternoon, it's clocked up more than £5,000 additionally, which is great in order to put new juice into that. And in terms of publicity, apart from some initial press that happened around the election, we've also been lining up interviews with the New European and Politico. So hopefully getting those pinned down just to set out the vision of what the European movement is about, just, bullying for more of a position for us going forward. In terms of me settling in, the first meeting that I chaired as chair was actually on Wednesday, just a few hours after being announced as chair. And that was a group that was set up to help appoint or find and then appoint a new CEO. So let me take the opportunity now just to say many thanks to Anna Bird for having been such an excellent CEO, in particular what she has achieved during 2022 with the real staff build-up, which means that there's a lot more capacity now going forward, and hopefully you're seeing that in upgrade and responsiveness from the team with regards to data, with regards to events, with regards to all inquiries. We want to expand that and build on that further. But Anna has really gone from a very fragile place when she first came on board to actually giving us a team before she goes off to her new job. And good luck to her on that, but she's given us a good inheritance of capacity that we intend to build on. And it looks like from that group for hunting out a new CEO, we've already got good processes. We've got the job description, we've got the description of where we are. We found partners who can help us in terms of recruitment agencies, and we've got plans, backup plans and interim measures and all sorts. So that's getting in place. That was Wednesday. Then on the Friday, I met Anna for a handover meeting, and I've got all the documents I could possibly wish to have, and then some more. So that's all been put safely in my hands. Then on the Monday, I had a meeting with the EM staff team. I know them already and they know me, but I haven't been in contact with them for 2 months of campaigning. So it was really good to touch base with them again and field all their questions about what's going on in intentions. Then on Tuesday, I chaired my first executive committee meeting, and that went really well as well. So we've got a good cohesive team going on there with lots of progress in the pipeline. And tonight there's this event, of course, where I'm just here available for your questions, just to make sure that that availability is there to all of the EM members. And then tomorrow I will be traveling down to Kent, where East Kent have a talk by Dominic Grieve there. So I'm going down to hang out with Dominic Grieve and meet the again the East Kent crew, answer questions there. And on that topic, the Conservative contingent within European movement is really, really important to solidify and build on. So I'm going to be asking Dominic's opinion and advice and steer on that going forward, because essentially European movement is passionately a cross-party organisation, and we do need a rehabilitation of the Conservative Party, and there's so much that can be done within the Conservative fold themselves. The European movement absolutely has to be a safe haven for nurturing pro-European Conservatives. And we really, really need to have that role nationwide, because that's going to be very important going forward. So I'm seeking various people's advice about that. You will know that Dominic backed Patience for the role, but I'm very happy to say that with regard to both Patience and Tom, they sent me really lovely congratulations messages. I've been in contact with both of them sort of many times over, and in discussions. I want to build them in to what EM is doing. Obviously, the priority is for me to get my feet under the desk and set certain things up, but those conversations are ongoing, they take time. But having said that, Tom Brake is already helping out on something very important, and he is keen, for example, to help out with the network of UK politicians. We still need to arrange how exactly that role goes. I need to work that out with, CEO, need to work that out with exec. But in terms of, shall we say, just getting stuck in, I told Tom, I said, with the Leeds for Europe petition, they've got a date in Parliament. And he said, yeah, I've been watching that. And I said, would you be able to help them out, just round up some MPs for that date and for general promotion? And he said, yeah, absolutely, I can do that right now. Who should I speak to? And I said, Peter Packham, sent him the contact. He talked to Peter right away. So Tom's already fully on board and helping out with that. And for me, as I said a few times during the campaign, that Brexit inquiry petition from Leeds for Europe that got over 100,000 signatures and then got a date in the Commons, and for which there's been lots of promotion, and we've done polling that shows that Leave voters support it on balance and Conservatives support it on balance, having a Brexit inquiry. This is a real sort of flagship example of what I think grassroots all over the country can do and need EM's backing on. So it's really good on the optics, it's really good on the vibrancy. So I would encourage everyone to get behind that. Incidentally, we've encouraged Open Britain as well to help promote it as well. It's now got over 125,000 signatures and has rocketed up last night and today. So going forward, so that's just to give you a flavour of in the last week what I've been pushing and driving, and I've had lots of congratulations from lots of people, both nationally and internationally, lots of phone calls and meetings lined up in order to gel everything together and make it cohesive and make sure that we're a really big tent going forward. And accessibility and interaction are going to be vital to all of that, so that everyone has a role in this huge endeavor going forward. And I would like to have many more events like this, for example, webinars, and more reasons to bring the membership into the fold for updates, for discussions, for interactions, because I think the community aspect to everything we do in online, but also in the real world, and having physical events and physical activities, I think that is fundamental to building the community that we are. And so I'll stop there, but I'll just say, and if you want to help on that right now and really sort of get your shoulder to the wheel, join us all in trying to push hard right now at this moment, then do help with that crowdfunder if you can. Do help ask family and friends to get on board with membership, you know, while it's surging now. Have those conversations whereby you call up your brother or your sister or your work colleague and say, wonder if you could help me out with something. Just try it out for a few months. It would really make a difference. Yeah, if you're prepared to have a few of those conversations and get 1, 2, 3 people on board, that does make a huge difference. And then finally, do look out for and support that Leads for Europe government petition. Sign it, encourage others to sign it, help push it online, because I think that this is going to be a big drive that we should be getting behind, because I think it's going to knock on to other things that's going to be very helpful in our step-by-step to rejoin direction. And I'll wrap it up there, and I'll just jump into questions from that point. How this is going to work is that if you want to ask a question, put up your hand digitally. You should know how to do that by, well, Scott can give you details on that. Scott will then invite you to ask a question, largely on a first come, first served basis, but also using Scott's knowledge of all of you and general wisdom to ensure that there's a good balance across sort of male, female, regions, ages, and so forth and so on. So over to you, Scott, to take charge of the next bit.
Thanks, Mike. You flatter me with your description of my wisdom. We've got a few people asking questions here. I'm going to go straight in with Philippe, who will be the first person. Just a reminder, if you raise your hand using the raise hand function at the bottom of the screen, it'll let me know you want to ask a question. I'll then ask you to unmute and bring you onto the spotlight on the stream, and you'll be able to ask Mike the question directly. So Philippe, I'm just going to ask you to unmute, and then I'll add you onto the spotlight. Then we'll go to Rhiannon, then John.
Thank you for the spotlight. I wasn't expecting to be the first, but somebody has to be first. I'm Philippe from Taunton in Somerset, and effectively I've been watching this Brexit debacle from 2016. As you can tell, I've got a bit of an accent. I'm French. I've been in the UK since 1986. And effectively, watching what has been happening since 2016, I think I can see the tide turning regarding Brexit since effectively 2022. I remember that even in 2019, the mood from polls seemed to have been that Brexit could never be undone, get on with it, try to find the best way forward. Now, I think, and that's just my feeling, that the tide might be turning. So, Mike, what I would like to ask you is, in your opinion, whether it's based on fact or more on the general trend of things, what do you think our chances are, for the UK to rejoin the EU, and what would be the time frame?
So the time frame is difficult because there's lots of unknown unknowns. Certainly, the ambition is that for the next election, which could come end of this year or could come next year, we want to make sure that we're in a very strong position for that we have turned the public dials strongly and robustly against Brexit, but also for things like free movement, single market, British European standards, all of the fundamental value stuff. I mean, we can make the economic arguments, but we also need to make sure that we're in a strong place, region by region, locality by locality, but also demographic by demographic, making sure that all the different groups that compose this fabric that is our country have to them a sort of an offering, a vision of what their priorities and what their opportunities are in a future where we're rebuilding with the European Union and joining it. So that's the ambition for going into the election, as well as trying to stop Labour from painting their red lines about no free movement, no single market too heavily, okay? because the idea is that say what you want for the general election, but when they get into power, if they really want to fix anything economically, and if they really want to satisfy their own voting base in terms of what their own voting base will expect, it is going to have to be some big, bold steps back to the EU, and that's where we need to turn the screws on it. So then the question becomes, presuming that it's a Labour outright win, do we get some of the major concessions, such as free movement or single market, in Labour's first term? Or do we have to try and ensure that it would then come in a second term? And of course, we're going to do our damnedest to try and really, really put on the screws in the first term. But all of this comes from, firstly, making sure that the public polling is there, the pressure is there on all of the key elements that need to happen, and then you drag and drop in the business pressure, and then the pressure through Labour's CLPs, and then also through the Conservative Party, if you can help rehabilitate that to be more pro-European, so they feel comfortable niggling a Labour government on some of those fronts. These are all the kind of elements that you want to bring into play. And you don't know exactly how they're going to pan out, but that's the kind of lines of pressure and sort of timings and broad brushstrokes about where the thinking is.
Thanks, Mike.
Great, thanks, Mike, and thank you, Philippe, for that great question. The next person we're going to be bringing in is Rhiannon, but just before we do, I just want to bring to your attention the links that people have posted in the chat function. Mike, in his introduction, mentions the Leeds for Europe petition and the East Kent meeting. Richard's posted the link to the Leeds for Europe petition, and Chris has posted the link to the East Kent meeting in the chat. And my colleague Emma has also posted a link to the European Movement crowdfunder, which is getting some great traction at the moment. So please do check out those links in the chat and spread them around and share them around through all your networks. Rhiannon, I'm going to bring you in now to ask your question. I'm just going to ask you to unmute.
Hello, thank you very much. I'm Rhiannon Barra. I represent Wales for Europe on the National Council, and I'm also Secretary of Swansea for Europe. And my question just wants to sort of roll back a little bit from a future Labour government. When we reach campaigning for a general election, what will the European movement stance be about endorsing candidates or not? You know, we are a cross-party organisation, and I want to know, before we go into this, what you recommend us doing, or whether you would recommend us endorsing certain MPs, candidates. Thank you.
Right. That is an excellent question, and you have...
Before we go into this, what you recommend us...
Oh, there was a strange echo there. Right. So that's an excellent question, because the European movement has been through various elections before, and there are risks in going through it, given that we are cross-party nature and many groups. So use of materials, use of lists, disagreement within groups is all something that I present actually to a degree of risk. But there's also opportunities in there. So I will tell you now, Rhiannon, because why not? And you're on the National Council. You know, we've just arranged a National Council meeting in order to anticipate in good time the one before the one in June. What I really want from the National Council to tap into their thinking and their research capacity and their campaign know-how is to actually help set up a plan, a business plan for what European movement does during the next general election. And there are two aspects to that. One is putting together a risk register of what we regard, you know, from our own knowledge, but also from extrapolation, to be risks to European movement during an election period, but also a list of opportunities as to what we can do to either strengthen ourselves or gain opportunities during an election period. I think for the most part, it is not a good idea to be picking individuals to back because we are cross-party by nature and we want to be able to go into an election period with good cohesive feel and then come out of an election period with good cohesive feel. And I feel that trying to pick individual candidates is quite the recipe for disaster. That's my thinking on it. But of course, I want to hear what the exec think and the National Council think, because it's through those mechanisms that we together as a team make policy. So that's my answer to that. And now you know what I have planned for that upcoming National Council meeting.
It's great. Thanks, Mike. And thanks, Brianna, as well. Next, we're going to go to John Hill. John, I'm just going to ask you to unmute.
Hi there, guys. John Hill from Cotswolds for Europe, also editor of West England Bylines, pushing the message out through the Bylines network. My question, Mike, is really related to what Rhiannon was saying. When we're coming up to a general election, surely the strategy must be to remove this Conservative government, not to alienate all Conservatives, but and if the present Conservative government does get re-elected, then we're really in a bad position. So we have got to ensure that we get the Conservatives out, but then we want to win them over because the EU will never accept us back in unless both major parties are supporting rejoin. So what sort of conversations are we going to have with moderate Conservatives to persuade them to transform the Conservative Party?
Right, so there's a few questions there to unpack. You're absolutely right that if we want to rejoin the EU is going to look at the UK and say, does this country look like it's going to come on board and then be a happy and productive partner in the team for posterity? Or is it a Labour government bringing us in, but then when a Conservative government comes in, they'll pull themselves back out again, and we'll be doing the hokey cokey down the decades, you know, in, out, causing a headache for everyone. So that's why it's absolutely fundamental that we get that rehabilitation of the Conservative Party back to their origins, their Churchillian and their Thatcher origins, which was about the rights and empowerment of British citizens, the free trade and empowerment of trade, and also the security of the continent. So that ambition is right. With regard to the next election, though, and I know this from experience, a lot of our power lies in the activists themselves, but during a general election, it's questionable how much European movement can actually direct the activists what to do in each and every sort of constituency. Whereas you can alternatively trust their judgment to align with their inclinations and their parties and dissipate back into their own constituencies, pick up relations they have with their parties and work on that basis. And I would also remind you that when elections kick off, general elections kick off, you know, the Conservatives unload their sort of war chest, Labour unloads their war chest, and same with Lib Dems and SNPs, and you know, there's money and there's also activists. And in 650 constituencies around the UK, you have in each constituency various candidate competitors and the grassroots teams around them, and fuller campaigns around that. So trying to go toe to toe with the major parties during an election campaign and get media attention and spend money on adverts and trying to get cut through. You can debate the wisdom of that versus trying to set up the right conditions before an election happens and then getting ready to anticipate the result at the other end, rather than spending all of your money as a drop in the water of a bigger gush. So I think these are serious questions that we need to address, but as part of a package, because how we behave during a general election is a serious business plan. It's a serious all-round bundle, and we should be working on that all together rather than jumping to a conclusion about it. Yes, we've got previous years of experience from that, but again, I want to build this plan as a cohesive team, starting with the building blocks of what are our risks and what are our opportunities. Okay.
Great, thanks, Mike. I did say at the start we wanted to bring people in from a range of locations and make sure we had gender balance on that, and everyone seems to be doing that themselves, looking at where people are from. So next I'm going to go to David, then I'll pick Christopher, then we'll go to Helen after that. So David, I'm just going to ask you to unmute now.
Is that me, this David?
It is, yeah.
Oh, hi there. David Lamb, I'm in Brighton. My question is more specific about a particular policy angle. It's about migration and immigration. Because at the moment, I mean, it seems it's in the news, it's kind of really phenomenal at the moment about all the mess about everything really, you know, boats or people, etc. And I just wonder what, it feels to me like it's a weak spot in our strategy. Well, I mean, I don't know what the strategy is really, but I mean, it's an issue which I think is going to be difficult. It seems to have subsided since the referendum. Obviously, the issue has subsided, and we don't have the same sort of populist rhetoric around so much now. But it is still a big issue, and I just wonder. You think that's not true? You think it's still around, judging by the wink? Yeah, obviously it is, but I just think it feels like it's not quite so. It's not playing quite so hard at the moment, I don't think. But although, I mean, having said that, the more I think about it now, I say, you know, suella brava, man, and you know, what can you think? So my question really is, how do we make this thing about migration and free movement seem like it's attractive without being a threat to us? Because I have a feeling that in the referendum, even if we'd have listened to all of the economic arguments, they were very sound. But you know, I think what trumped it was the free movement idea and, you know, controlling borders. So
yeah.
You know.
So this is a really interesting question that we absolutely need to tackle fundamentally. Now, recently, about 3 weeks ago, I ordered some polling from Omnisus, who do polling for Byline Times, sometimes us Bylines Network, and also increasingly European Movement. They're a great outfit, and they're regularly, weekly tracking key Brexit questions. And I asked them to put in the question, do you think there should be free movement for Brits across the EU so that they can travel and get jobs? And then, unsurprisingly, you know, in the 70s, or if you remove don't knows, then in the 80s for yes. Followed up by the question, do you think there should be mutual free movement so that Brits have work and travel rights in the EU, and EU citizens have work and travel rights in the UK? Yes was in the 70s, and if you remove don't knows, it was 84. And you also saw a majority within Conservatives for that, and within Leave voters for that. It was remarkable. I wrote it up with Juliet Lodge in Yorkshire Bylines. So this is something whereby, and lots of people who've ever done polling or research on immigration find the same, how you phrase the question about immigration makes such a big difference to the answer that you get back if you phrase anything in terms of, you know, would you accept this or would you agree to this if it were to help the NHS or if it were to help staffing in the NHS, that's another one where it absolutely tends to heavily swing it towards yes. So the important message about that is that people do have conceptions about free movement, you know, those who hadn't been paying much attention, as a sort of free rights for Europeans to just come here on any terms. They didn't realize there was the 3-month travel window, after which there were restrictions. You had to have a job, or you had to be able to prove that you can pay your own way or someone else can, things that we've never employed. So there's lots of flexibility that we can play with. And I think we can even start, you know, floating around notions such as, do you think it's a good idea that we pick up mutual free movement if it helps us get a returns deal with the EU about migrants or asylum seekers, right? So, you know, that deal that we had before in the EU, which we don't have now, well, would the EU be amenable to it if we're helping Brits' rights and EU citizens' rights for just work and travel? I think there's a lot that can be played around with there. There is a word of caution, though, and that is that, and this comes from the EM staff team where we were discussing this. During 2019, there was such hostility to the notion of free movement at that time that it's really scarred a lot of people in Labour that were arguing for it. I think a lot of the top brass in Labour feel, you know, the scars, feel fear about that issue. And I know someone who mentioned it during 2019 when she was sort of campaigning for Labour, and security had to, you know, jump in and stop a guy from essentially leaping over the desk at her in frothing aggression. So I think there is still a sense of intimidation that Labour feel about opening these notions again. You're seeing it at the moment targeted towards dinghies, you know, stop the boats, deport them to Rwanda, or sink the boats, you know, that kind of hostility has transferred. That doesn't mean it's gone forever. And so the fear is that it could transfer back. But I think that if we want to start cracking all the things that we want to crack, we have to be taking on some of these issues. We have to think about who gets to frame it first when we talk about free movement. We have to point out the opportunities in that, but we also have to have an understanding of the best language to use, and some of those demographics that Labour's really caring about at the moment, which is basically the red wall switches in 2019 from Labour to Conservatives and what they think, you know, the language to be used there, the ideas to be used there, finding champions there that are up for free movement rights, mutual free movement rights. I think we need to do that hard work to open up Labour on it, because I think Labour themselves are not instinctively going to do that for us. So that's what I think about that. I think there's a lot of opportunity in it, but I think we do have to take it on in clever ways and find how we can robustly nix any aggression that may come back from that.
Great, thanks, Mike. Chris Mercer is going to be the next person, and then we'll go to Helen after that. So Chris, I'm just going to ask you to unmute.
Oh, thank you. I'm speaking, excuse me, I'm speaking from London. Mike, I'd like to take us back, if I can, to the theme we had earlier on as to how and when we might get back into the EU. And it seems to me, from what I've felt over the last few years, increasingly, that although it's the MPs in Parliament and the parties themselves who are going to decide whether that were ever possible, actually, what makes the parties decide what their policy is arithmetic, is the sums they do on the basis of whether, if they were to suddenly start supporting a return to the EU, whether they'd lose loads of seats or gain them. And yep. So really the people that we ought to be influencing most of all are the voters that we think actually voted to leave last time. And I think actually they're quite malleable. And I think increasingly as people realize the effects, and the sort of people, I mean, don't get me wrong, I think the people who did vote for us to leave were misled, but increasingly they're starting to realize the effects, and particularly probably when they increasingly go on holiday to Europe. And I mean, I don't know if we'd be allowed to, but it seems to me a very strong place to draw their attention to their problems would be by the queues for their passport controls and at the customs points where they're only being allowed to bring a certain amount of alcohol back and all those sort of things. And the fact that they're things that they could buy in Europe and have sent to them for nothing are now being delayed, and they're having to pay money when they arrive. And these are when the sort of people that voted to leave are probably most strongly influenced. And if the parties would accept that fact and were starting to get worried that actually they wouldn't win a seat unless they did support us rejoining, that might be an argument. I don't know, maybe that's a little bit pie in the sky, but it seems to be that we've got to influence the people, and then the parties have got to get worried about the fact that, you know, their view is against that of the people. I mean, you're talking about the red wall, but that's exactly the sort of people that we're trying to get on our side as well.
Yeah.
Is that a fair?
Oh, no, it's absolutely that. And one of the main reasons why I started Scientists for EU is that for the years beforehand, I had been involved in science policy and science politics, if you will. And after from the austerity of 2010 onwards, UK science was at the bottom of the G8 for funding, and all the politicians of all political parties knew that Britain was great at science. They trusted the judgment of scientists. We had endless meetings with different science representatives and governments and political parties about, you know, this is so important for our economic future. You know, science and innovation drives everything, and we've got top talent here, and, you know, we're in such a fortunate position in the world with being an English-speaking language on top of the EU science programme and natural connectors, and they would all say yes, 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 but wouldn't lift the science budget. In fact, we all had to be really thankful to David Willetts, the science minister back at the time, for not cutting the science budget further. He was our hero, he was our rescuer, and that was at the time when we were at the bottom of the G8. So that's why, with Scientists for EU, I thought we've got an opportunity in this referendum to actually get articles out to the press ourselves. It was Scientists for EU and Universities UK together, because they had a lot of heft, and so we had a joint effort. It really trying to make a lot of noise in the press, try to infuse it into other people's arguments. And we saw the shift in politicians' attitudes, and then we saw it in 2017, where the Conservatives, Labour and Lib Dems all promised to double science funding in their manifestos. And I was like, yeah, proven, point proven. You know, they can know, just as now politicians know, that Brexit is damaging, but until they're seeing those arguments constantly in the press, and, you know, they feel as though they have to have answers to it themselves, or their constituents are bothering them about it, then they don't feel that's what they have to do. So politicians do work by pressure. They think they're leaders, they're not leaders. They are always pulled by the nose by one force or another force. So what we have to do is understand what are the forces that pull them along. So in rural constituencies and rural seats, you know, the farmers and the local environmental issues, go hard on that, have champions on that, have local campaigns on that. With regard to red wall seats, make sure that we have champions that are typically your red wall switchers from 2019, who you've got on board, who can say, yeah, I voted for that, but by God, that's not what I want now. this is hurting me, this is hurting my family, this is hurting the business of my brother-in-law. You know, you have to find those champions so people go, oh, that's a sea change from the main lines of pressure that I know I need to respond to in order to keep my seat. That's what we need to identify. And instead of, you know, telling people, you know, surely you think this and surely you think that, you actually have to say, what's important to you, what's important to your family, what kind of Britain do you want to see? And from that viewpoint, say, well, you know what, that would be helped by this and by that. Do you agree? Can we work together on this? So it's always got to be, instead of telling people sort of what to think, finding out what people do think, and those that align, you help increase their voices. And that's why what we're doing here has to be big community, it has to be society-wide, and we need lots of champions across lots of different parties, age demographics, localities, sectors, everything.
That's great, thanks, Mike. On the point about passport control, I can definitely sympathise with what Chris was saying. I went to Madrid a couple of months before Brexit, or before the end of the transition period, then a couple of months afterwards. First time it took me less than a minute to go through passport control, and then the second time it took an hour and a half. So there was definitely a difference. Next, we're going to come to Helen Grogan, and then after that, it'll be Vicky. So Helen, I'm just going to ask you to unmute.
Hi, Mike. Congratulations.
Thank you.
My question is, you're wanting to increase the number of members, but with the cost of living crisis, making ends meet a priority for many families, and the subscription to many organisations have been cancelled, and now I've had to cancel a few of my own. Many of our supporters would like to become members but can't afford the added luxury. So what can membership of the EM offer that being a supporter or activist doesn't?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question that actually came up during the election, including, you know, in the first phase, we're talking to people in the National Council. You know, what does EM membership bring apart from, you know, a Brexit watch in your inbox every week? For me, now that we are through the pandemic, we do need to be getting back into the community building, real world community building as well, with more events, but also you've got to mix that with online events open to the members, you know, as this one is. There is tons of good speakers that we should be bringing on board. And also in terms of policy development, having that more open so that as we're developing policy and sort of coming up with ideas, we're inviting people into that melting pot that is then exclusive to members as well. So if you're a member, then you're at the heart of the community and get, you know, special access to a lot of activities that are happening. That's what I think is, you know, the main draw for people who are EM members and want more from EM. They largely want to be more involved, want to be more included, want to have their finger on the pulse. And that for me, from what I can judge, is the main sort of benefit and package. Having said that, if any of you have any ideas about what you think membership should have or include, then do feel free to email me and email me suggestions. I mean, good part of what I want to do here is, as I said at the beginning, just be very, very accessible, because I think that's really important in the kind of movement that we've got at EM, which is everyone's ideas are sort of valued, have access to consideration, and we all work together and meet up regularly and exchange ideas on stuff. So if you do have ideas about what you think membership can do to improve the offering that it is, then send that through to me.
Great, thanks, Mike. Next, we're going to go to Vicky Seddon, and then after that, we'll go to Elizabeth Baker. So, Vicky, I'm just going to ask you to unmute.
Okay, thank you. Congratulations, Mike, and very nice to see a very clear result for you. Nice to have you on board. When we were a member of the EU, the UK was given all kinds of things that happened, and the EU said, the UK said, no, we're not very happy about that, and we were allowed concessions of all kinds. If we want to go back in, if we try to go back in, we're unlikely to get those concessions. That's likely to be an issue. So how on earth do we try to deal with that?
So I think this is an important point, because I hear people raising it regularly, and I hear people also saying, oh, we'll have to accept the euro, for example. So just to clear up some fundamental legal understandings on this matter, there's no conditions really set out already that the UK has to meet to go in. What would happen is that the EU member states that are already member states get together and think about the conditions needed for any member to come in. So, for example, with the euro, a lot of people say, oh, it's a Copenhagen Convention. So the Copenhagen Conventions were from 1993, when they were looking at a bunch of new countries coming in, mainly the Eastern European countries, and we're thinking, what approach do we take with this? You know, what are the demands that we're going to make in order to get reasonable stability from when these countries come in? And there was a raft of recommendations, and they were recommendations, they weren't legally binding, including membership of the euro. So that was 30 years ago, and that was for that circumstance. As we come back into the EU, as we will be looked at as, you know, a special case, given our history and given our size. So some things, such as the rebate, I don't think we're going to get the rebate again. However, it's all a negotiation, and it would be a big win for the EU to get us back on board, especially if we're presenting the right way. Maybe there are some other things that we can haggle to our advantage if we feel we need to. For example, you know, you're probably going to get a better fishing deal going in than you are coming out. Or with regard to the common agricultural policy, I think there are various updates that need to be made with regard to paying vast sums, for example, to landowners, which when we were in the EU, we never kicked up a fuss about, but it could be something that evolves, and that we could have our own demands on sort of going in, which would also be helpful to other EU countries. You just don't know what the negotiation framework is going to be going in. But if we do go into the EU, then it is a win-win, and lots of things can happen when it's a win-win. In coming out of the EU, it was a lose-lose, so there were no particular wins that we could get from that, and I think that's a really different scenario. Also, imagine, if you will, if we were to come into the EU at the same time that Ukraine comes into the EU, right? What a moment that would be. There'd be lots of flexibility, you would have thought, in order to get both the UK and Ukraine on board, because that is a moment in history. That is a real shoring up of European security and the European market, shared market. So I think that we shouldn't worry too much about those kind of concessions, because we already know that it's going to be, we've done the experiment. We already know it's going to be a benefit to us going in. And there is, of course, more flexibility in negotiations when it's a win-win anyway.
That's perfect. Thanks, Mike.
Somebody said the UK would likely be a significant contributor to the EU budget again. Yeah, maybe not as large as before, given the damage that we've taken. Yeah.
That's great. Thanks, Mike. We'll go to Elizabeth Baker next. I think we've got time for one, maybe two more questions. We'll see how many we can get through. So Elizabeth, you'll be the next person.
Hi, Mike. Congratulations on your election victory. You've mentioned the Red Wall a few times, and when your vote is over, we in Staffordshire work with quite a number of the Midlands Red Wall seats. And we found that there's quite a softening of attitude amongst people who voted to leave. And the freedom of movement issue comes up sometimes. And whilst there's not any hostility, people who voted and thought they voted against it try to think of ways around that. So the questions we tend to get asked are, why can't the UK train more of its own professionals? And why can't we give visas to EU people like doctors? So they don't. One of the gaps in understanding is the reciprocal recognition of qualifications and service. So we've tried to explain to people that doctors won't come anymore from Spain because they won't. The time they spend here won't necessarily count. But those are the sorts of things. So they now know, we think, by and large, that there's been damage done and that freedom of movement was beneficial, but they're still looking to find ways around that. How can we do it without actually getting all the way back to freedom of movement? Something where, you know, we issue visas. So you need to do that. And what I was thinking is, during the 2018 and 19 People's Vote campaign, we once or twice had people come from London to help us out in Stoke. And they found that their views of what people were like here were wrong. And they were quite shocked. And one suggestion I would make is that if we could, we do some mix and match so that people in different parts of the country move around to help others to campaign, so that you're not just relying on polling figures or stereotypes. And the people across the European movement actually do get to find out what it's like, because our view is that many of our colleagues in Remain type areas don't really know. And the people here aren't as black and white as they're made out to be. And there's a lot of soft voters in the middle who were fooled and will admit they were fooled into going the wrong way. And they wish they hadn't done it, but they're not at the point of saying, let's undo it, because they think we need to struggle on a bit yet and prove to ourselves we can't make it work before we flip. And I think that's where you need to focus on the Red Wall areas. In terms of the people who really are against the immigration, we had some, what we could only describe as hardcore racists, who came and said that it was a mistake for them to vote for Brexit because Brexit had caused them huge problems and hadn't solved any of the problems they thought it would. And they do actually know it made it worse, but they aren't going to vote for Conservative or Labour. They're going to jump straight into the Richard Tice band and vote Reform. So the Labour Party is wasting its time chasing after them.
You said lots of good things in there, Liz. I like the idea of groups moving around to other areas, because not only does that help break down perceptions, but it also makes for a lovely day out, and not just for our own groups, but for chatting to people in the street. Like, for example, if you go to, I don't know, Newcastle or something like that, and say, well, actually, you know, in Stoke, lots of people are talking about this and saying, you know, the people on the street there would find that fascinating too. It's in our human nature that we're always fascinated about what's going on elsewhere and what the thoughts are elsewhere. And I think that sounds like a lovely bit of sort of like mixing around and sharing experiences and so forth and so on. And, you know, some areas are tougher than others. I mean, I understand that Wakefield's still very tough relative to, for example, Leeds, which was always a Remain city anyway. And you do have to kind of tailor understandings to where you are, but it's also important for people to sort of mix and match around a lot. With what you were getting to about, you know, how you talk about immigration and how you talk about skilling, you know, just having the conversations. So many people just haven't had the proper conversations yet. And it takes that hard work at the coalface to say, well, I want our rights to travel around and work and want that for our youth. And if we can do that in exchange for doctors and nurses and hospitality coming over here more easily and people who work on our farms, then, you know, why not? We get the economic benefit, but then we also get more rights ourselves. But the notion, fundamental to all politics everywhere, all parties, the fundamental notion is always fairness. What's fair? You know, that's why politics gets people wound up, because it's always about, you know, what's fair, who's ripping us off, who's getting a free ride, you know, how do you make a fairer society? So as long as you're talking about immigration in terms of what's fair for us in particular, what's fair from their point of view in terms of their opportunities and what's fair for our country, then you can talk about all of these things more effortlessly. If you start talking about other people's rights over there and they say, I don't want to hear about that, you know, giving them rights when I don't feel as though I've got any, it always comes down to reciprocity and fairness as fundamental concepts. Right, next.
I think we're running out of time now because we are going towards half the hour. However, I'm going to use host prerogative since I'm also a member of the European Movement to ask the final question. You mentioned at the start, Mike, how we've now just gone above 18,000 members, which is the highest we've ever had. In fact, it's okay. The light's just gone out in the office. That's good. In fact, the membership has actually quadrupled in size since I became a member of staff at the European Movement. I was wondering, like, what do you see as the biggest opportunity of us being a movement of that sort of size since we're growing so fast? And what do you want to do as chair to sort of seize on that sort of momentum and passion that we have within the membership?
I want to get the membership to a size whereby I feel as though EM really is an engine behind our communities all over the country. So that we are at that size whereby we've got the resources to really help out the local groups with finances, with promotion, with local events, getting in speakers, great responsiveness when they throw in inquiries. So everyone feels around the country, I can really build my group here. And EM, I just get them on the phone. And, you know, I would love for us to have enough juice in the tank so that we can have regional managers or regional point people in, you know, north of England, Midlands and South, just like we've now got for Wales for Europe and European Movement in Scotland, so that we've got in our team people that connect right to kind of like a regional plan where those local groups are working together, and those local groups feel as though they've got a person that really gets what they're about and how they want to develop, and works with building that up on a regional level, pulling in the businesses, getting talks going, meeting up with other communities there, cross-fertilizing, all of that. I want us to have enough size and power to really make sure that we can facilitate that all over the country. And I think that would be absolutely unique. And it's in exactly the kind of spirit that I think we want to be building up who we are as a nationwide community.
That's great, Mike. Thank you so much for that response. And I'm sure that a lot of people here, we've got over 100 people on the line, will be really motivated by those words and also the answers you've given today. So yeah, just want to thank everybody for joining us. As I said, we had about 120 people on the line at the height here. Hopefully we got through most people's questions. I know Sarah and Rosalind, sorry, we didn't get a chance to get to your questions, but I'm sure Mike, you'd be happy to answer.
Sarah, Rosalind, email them to me. I will put my email in the chat here to everyone. And Scott, what's my EM email? Is it
so if anyone wants to send a message to Mike, just send an email to mike.galsworthy@europeanmovement.co.uk. We can follow that up to everyone who attended and put that in an email to you as well. But yeah, I just want to say, obviously, like a lot of people said, congratulations, Mike, on your election as chair, and thank you everyone for coming. There's been a lot of great questions today, and I'm really excited as both a member of the movement and also a staff member to see what the next stage comes for our movement. So Thank you very much. And Mike, I don't know if you have a few final words before we finish.
And before you close it, through you, Scott, I would just like to say in front of all the members here, thanks so much to the European Movement staff for all the work they did in running that election, which means the structure behind the voting system, the hustings, addressing questions that Tom, Patience and I had all the time. You know, Emma and Molly were responsive all the way through. So certainly from this end, it was a great experience, and I hope it was for all the members as well.